broadcasting from Park Avenue in New York City. Brought to you by Global Wealth Office at Nest Seekers International and Classique Moderne. This is Peace and Good Wealth. Welcome to a special episode of Peace and Good Wealth. The preceding episode is a recording of a panel comprised of an inspiring group of visionaries, creators, and thinkers discussing AI and art, the future of creative expression. Held at the historical Lincoln Isham House, 122 East 38th Street in New York City, the evening sparked dialogue around the evolving role of artificial intelligence in the creative process, from generative design to ethical considerations and the preservation of human touch in a digital age. With thought-provoking insights from leading voices in tech, art, law, and culture, this gathering marked not just a conversation, but a meaningful step in a larger dialogue. At Global Wealth Office, we are committed to convening thought leaders across disciplines to explore ideas that shape not only markets, but the future of culture, creativity, and humanity itself. Join us, and thank you.
Welcome, everybody. It's 7:05, so let's begin. Thank you very much for coming. A lot of you are not just guests, but the closest to us. We also selected an exclusive list of people that whom we felt would really find this type of discussion very engaging, very thoughtful, and hopefully will give some perspective on not just art itself or artificial intelligence itself, but also things to think about in terms of concepts and human existence and intelligence and where we will be years from now. So in preparation for this evening, what I thought would be the most appropriate is to not edit the bios of our distinguished panelists, but instead have AI or ChatGPT tell me what I should say about them. So I warn you, it sounds like an introduction to contestants of the Miss Universe pageant. Okay?
Because it knows.
So, but in all fairness, it does annotate everything. So let's start with Stephanie Armstrong. Stephanie Armstrong is the managing partner at Beaumont Nathan, a prominent art advisory firm with offices in New York and London. By the way, if it's wrong, I didn't do it. She leads the firm's commercial team and plays a pivotal role in client strategy and the overall development of the business. With a background in economics and art history, Stephanie brings a unique blend of analytical and artistic insight to her role. Prior to joining Beaumont Nathan, she spent 6 years at Christie's, one of the world's leading art auction houses. Her experience and leadership have been instrumental in the firm's growth and success in the art market. And in her spare time, she does wrestling. And the next, I'll skip downtown for a second. We'll do Roger Wu. Roger was a little bit hard because he had like one line descriptions of what he does, and you should really check out. But this is a summary. Roger Wu is a multifaceted entrepreneur, artist, and storyteller based in New York City. He co-founded Cooperatize, a travel influencer marketplace, which he successfully sold to Famecast. Prior to that, he co-founded Gift Finder and Clickable.tv, the latter of which was acquired by Hip Hop Shopping TV. Wu was also part of the founding team at Bloomberg Law and began his professional journey on Wall Street with Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. In the arts, Wu has made significant contributions to his pop conceptual art exhibitions, notably the Thought Experience series held in New York City. These exhibitions were inspired by contemporary installation art and aim to create immersive, thought-provoking experiences for audiences. As if that's not enough, beyond his entrepreneurial and artistic endeavors, Wu is a member of SAG-AFTRA, an avid curler serving on the board of Brooklyn Lakeside Curling, and a 3-time New York City marathon finisher. He holds degrees in finance and computer science from the University of Pennsylvania, where he also competed in rowing and bodybuilding. Scott Shoulder, talk about multi-hyphenated panelist. Scott Shoulder is a partner at Cohen DeBeats, Abraham and Shepard, and serves as co-chair of the firm's litigation practice group. Based in New York City, he specializes in entertainment, media, art, and intellectual property law, representing clients across various industries, including music, publishing, visual and fine arts, film and television, in matters involving copyright, trademark, right of publicity, unfair competition, and defamation defense. Next. There's more. Beyond his legal practice, Shoulder is also an accomplished digital artist, creating works under the moniker Metalhead. His artistic pursuits include NFT art and short fiction writing, reflecting his deep engagement with the creative community. He is a frequent speaker on topics related to copyright and trademark law, particularly as they intersect with emerging technologies like generative AI. He has participated in events such as Generative AI Week, where he discussed the legal challenges surrounding AI-generated content. In addition to his professional endeavors, Shoulder has a long-standing passion for music, and he played bass guitar for over 20 years. He currently performs with the CDAS house band, Redacted, alongside his colleagues. And last but not the least, James Rash, the founder of Science House and our host for this evening. James is a prolific inventor, entrepreneur, and innovation strategist renowned for his contributions at the intersection of technology, business, and human behavior. He is the founder of Science House, a New York-based innovation consultancy and model meetings, a firm dedicated to enhancing organizational efficiency through optimized meeting practices. Additionally, he serves as senior advisor at the Culture Institute in Zurich, focusing on corporate culture transformation. Dubbed the father of invention by Psychology Today, Harash holds over 750 US patents, with his innovations licensed by major companies such as Facebook, Groupon, Zynga, eBay, and Priceline. His tenure as head of inventing at Walker Digital was instrumental in incubating several businesses, including Priceline.com. Earlier in his career, he worked as a management consultant at Deloitte & Touche. He earned both his BS and MBA degrees from Cornell University. Beyond his professional endeavors, Jarash is a chess expert, memory competitor, and improv comedy teacher. He frequently speaks at conferences, has been featured in media outlets such as CNN, Atlantic Monthly, and Forbes. And there you go. That's our distinguished panel. But before we get to meet, may I just please take a few minutes to thank one person who actually is responsible for, greatly responsible for this evening, which is EJ Harrison. So EJ, I'm for EJ Harrison from Montreal. Single-handedly pulled together our panelists. I said, EJ, I need you. I'm going to do an art discussion about AI. He sat down and he said, what do you need to buy? And we had lunch. During lunch, he unrolled like a parchment full of people, and we went one by one. This one. And I'm glad to say that I still have backups from that list. So thank you very much, EJ. We really, truly appreciate you. So let's start. I think the interesting thing about artificial intelligence is how we apply that as a relative to human intelligence, right? I don't think we've ever had a real universal definition for art. Somebody's art is somebody's crap, right? Maybe that's sort of like the thought, and that's okay. But I think when it comes to collectible art, for instance, right, or art that stands to time, we may not be able to define it, but we know it when we see it. So the things that may not have been as valuable when it first started, like maybe Warhol's, or even the masterpieces, never started really as the greatest thing until much later. But they've endured through time. And the question is, okay, we know what happened in the past, we know what's happening in the present. But what happens in the future? And where do we go from here? And the reason art is very important, it's because art is the reason we do anything, right? All of the stuff that we do, whether it's math or science, etc., that's pretty easy to sort of describe and understand. But why do we write poetry? Why do we, paint pictures? Why do we photograph people? Those are things that give meaning to our existence. And so what's important to note is that is AI, is artificial intelligence, a tool, a partner, right, or a creator that is beyond who we are? So let's, according to ChatGPT, let's start with Stephanie. So, from an advisory perspective, Stephanie, how do you think AI or AI-generated art now, anticipating what it will be in the future, how are people receiving AI as part of the artistic process? Let's start there.
Sure, and I think the answer to that is probably a very long one and one that we probably don't have time to explore fully, but I'll try and be succinct. I think anytime the art world, as you alluded to, has encountered a new medium, there's always been resistance. You can even look back to Jan van Eyck when he first used oil paint for the first time. It really took 100 years for the Italian artists down south to start using it, because what they were using was egg tempera, and that was what they knew. And all of a sudden you have this medium that could recreate flesh, and you had skeptics saying how it must be the devil's work. How could anyone but God recreate the look of human flesh? Fast forward to the 18th, 19th century, when you have the advent of photography, which I think is probably the most apt comparison to what we're facing with AI. 200 years later, we still have people saying that is photography art? Is it as good as a painting? Can you say it's the result of the same amount of human process? So, and then jumping a little further, you have Marcel Duchamp coming forward and putting a urinal in a gallery, or Tracy Emin, setting up her bed and lying in it, and people saying, is that art? And so I think this is definitely not the first time that the art world's had to encounter these questions. But what we do know is that it takes a long time. And I think what we're seeing, is that we're really just at the start. I think, COVID really accelerated, I think, people's acceptance to the idea of digital art as a medium. But AI is really so much more than that. I think what we're seeing now is you have the full range of robots creating artworks themselves, or you have artists who are represented by very real galleries who have sell work that's not AI generated, but using AI as a tool to help enhance certain areas of their practice. I mean, if you think about Warhol, he would have loved AI. His whole theory of sort of the screen print, he would have loved to have a computer help him probably do that, even if the output might have looked the same. So I think in terms of advisory, I think it's the truth is it's really too early to say where it's going to be. But I think if we look back, I think we can be pretty sure that it's gonna change our world for sure.
And I think the other part of that is that, wow, this is really loud. The other part of it is that the media that the next generation is accustomed to is not necessarily the media that we grew up with. So where we grew up with canvases, and paint and film, the next generation, they grew up with, everything digital. And so it's much easier for them to, I would think, it's much easier for them to accept, art in a digital form, created by something, but by a program or by AI, more than, the people who, literally, shed blood to be able to get the right kind of red in the canvas, right? But in terms of creation, I'm going to jump a little bit to Roger. You're an artist, Roger. You're also in the tech field, and it's easy enough to say that AI is a tool and a resource. That's the easy part. But as a creator, is artificial intelligence a partner or a co-creator or an independent creator, and is that necessarily acceptable as a concept and an idea?
Well, I mean, I think that in general, right now AI is a tool. Is it a creator? I mean, I don't think we're at the point where AI just runs off by itself and decides to do a show. But you look at somebody. Does everybody know Damien Hirst? Or let's go to Warhol, right? Warhol had a factory, and I mean, I don't think he did most of the stuff that he was actually doing. So the whole notion that you have helpers is, I mean, and even the Renaissance guys, they had a whole school of other guys, and then at the end, Raphael signs his name and says, "Hey, good job," right? So AI is that, except that, sorry, there's no benefits or lunch today, and it's great. It's another tool. You pay, OpenAI $7, and then you get a nice piece of work that is not done yet. Maybe it's on its way, but you're halfway there. I mean, the best example that I can think of that used to take me hours to do. If I take a photo of you right now, but I want to put you in France, I'd have to take this photo, go to Photoshop, magic wand, every little thing. Oh my God, your hair is out of. Now remove background. Right? One button, remove background, and I could do this for everybody within an hour, and put anybody in anywhere. But before, this would take a day. Something so stupid as remove background, right? And so this is a tool that, like it or not, it's here. We can't put the toothpaste back.
But I would argue that when the masters had schools and students, the schools and the students learned the techniques of the masters, but they themselves had created their own style, and they were conscious of what they had to bring that's different from everybody else that's come to them. They didn't just mimic Michelangelo, or Rodin. They learned their techniques and then created their own concept. So even with artists would have like a certain era where they would have a certain body of work, and then it could be their, let's say, blue period, and then another something happens in their lives and they have another type of period. Whereas AI, what is that period? GPT 4.0 and it becomes 5.0. There's a difference between that type of schooling and understanding versus something that sort of like mimics what everybody else is doing, right?
Well, I think that where art is moving to, and I'm biased, I'm more on the conceptual side, but you look at this banana duct tape to a wall, right? Anybody could do it, and everybody talks about Jackson Pollock. Oh, I could have done that too. And so a lot of this is more about the ideas that are being put out there. There's an artist that's represented by Gagosian, and she runs O'Flaherty. I can't remember her name, but there's a Vulture article about her, and she basically has a outsourced Chinese factory that she says, "Hey, can you do this?" and comes back, and that's when she signs her name. Right? It's Damien Hirst. Damien Hirst has a woman, and I'm sorry if anybody has Damien Hirst. But she paints. I think her name is Rachel or something, right? She paints the little dot paintings, and if she were to go outside and say, "Hey, everybody, here's a dot painting," it's like, "Okay, I'll give you $1." Damien Hirst looks at it, he's like, "Great dot painting," signs his name. Now it's $10,000. And I think it's the same thing, whether it's a computer, whether it's a human,
Well, in the fashion world, they don't actually sew every single one, but right, you have the label of Armani or Loracana, etc. So the same. However, passing this on to, it's a really good segue for Scott Shoulder. So Scott, we were talking about what is intellectual property yesterday, and we talked about concept versus, is concept intellectual property legally, and what is defensible in terms of, is style a property of ownership, or how do we know when somebody owns something versus it is something that anybody could do?
Yeah, so it's a very hotly contested issue, but legally it's really not that gray, and copyright is like far grayer than you might think it is. Whether something's fair use is like the grayest of the gray, and you get 2 lawyers and 3 opinions on that. A concept, an idea, a fact, not copyrightable. It's right there in the statute. You cannot own or monopolize an idea. You cannot own a concept. You can't own a format. You can't have you can't have control over that. That's free for everybody to use. What you do own and what you can own is the expression of that idea, the expression of that concept, and technically it has to be fixed in a tangible medium. So it can't be something that is very ephemeral and fleeting and it's just gone. There have been cases about cultivated gardens and a bowl of food and things that last in computer memory for just a fraction of a second. Those things aren't necessarily copyrightable. Courts don't always agree on these things, but by and large, it has to be fixed in a tangible medium. And the bar for copyrightability is very low, very different from patents. I'm sure you know well the novelty requirement of patents. That's not copyright. In theory, I could take a piece of paper, I could draw a stick figure with some hair on it and glasses and a smiley face, and there you go. It's fixed in a tangible medium. It's an original conception. I didn't copy it from anybody. I own the copyright of that. So that's the expression of an idea. I can't own the concept of a stick figure, but I can own the thing that I made. So as soon as it's fixed, I own the copyright in it. I own the rights. If I want to sue somebody for infringement, I have to register with the Copyright Office. That's a whole other discussion. Whether you think that's a good idea or not. We're the only country in the world that requires that, but so be it. But a style is not copyrightable, and that's one of the big things that's come up in the context of generative AI is people are saying, telling Midjourney, create me a picture in the style of so-and-so. Where you draw the line between style and expression, your guess is as good as mine, because it has to be the standard for copyright infringement is that the allegedly infringing work has to be substantially similar to the infringed work. What does that mean? A jury decides that. You'll almost never get a judge to decide subjectively whether something is substantially similar. But the expression of that idea, if I make a picture in the style of, there was a lot of press about Greg Rutkowski, the artist who created a lot of Dungeons and Dragons kind of fantasy art in the earlier days of Midjourney and Stable Diffusion, creating this an image of a dragon in the style of Greg Rutkowski. That might feel like it's unfair, and maybe it is, and the question of whether and to what extent artists are losing, trained human artists are losing work is a separate question, but unless that picture is substantially similar to a specific work that he made, there's no real claim there. So it's an exercise in line drawing, I guess pun intended, but it's hard, and it's a finder of fact, whether that's a judge or a jury or whatever, they're the ones that will ultimately decide that if it has to go that far.
Well, also I think in arts, I think part of the question, and this is probably where the gray area sort of comes in, is that part of the value or the perceived value of the art itself is the experience of the creator, right? So for instance, I'll put it in very, very plain, very salesperson, terms. If I had nothing to do with the transaction, I shouldn't get paid, right? So if I didn't create something, I shouldn't get paid. regardless of how close it was to the way I would say something, it wouldn't matter because I didn't put in the effort and the thought and whatever into creating that art. So therefore, the value of that art is different from, like, the same thing as, the value of somebody who created multiple copies of footballs that we see in, multiple motels. It's not the same as a football that, that the Masters made, because there's a lot of thought and training that goes into that, right? But I think the other part of that is, and this is for James, in terms of, how do you foresee the AI challenging the fundamental understanding of human creativity and originality?
I mean, I think that's where all the fun is now. Like, I think people are using ChatGPT and they're typing in their prompts and they're getting it to, maybe it's going to make an image or it's going to create a blog post or rewrite an email for you. I think as an adventurer, what I'm looking for is something different that people are not doing, and I think there are opportunities out there. Like, we're prompting these AIs, we're asking them questions, but what questions are we not asking that they have really interesting answers to? And I think this applies in art as well. That I was in the room like 7 years ago talking about how is AI going to change art and writing out some ideas, and I have not seen anyone getting into these ideas just yet, because it's about thinking radically different. Like, it's not, they can create an image. Well, we've been creating images for a long time. You can create a 3D image in architecture, right? Architecture drawing. We've been doing that for a long time. What are we not doing that an AI might be able to do? And what would that look like? And is there another type of art? And I've thought about this, and I have some ideas in my head. What is a type of art that's never been done before that AI can either do or help us do? And to think about AI, like whether it's a tool or not, right? I think of AI as, it is a relationship, it is a tool, but it is also a tool not just to produce art, sort of like a factory sort of style of art. Like, I'm gonna prompt something and I'm gonna get a bunch of output back. But prompting and querying AI to understand our own minds and how we do art, and to make us do art differently. So I do improv comedy, right? So I have been starting to dig into and work with AIs to understand what humor is, what makes us laugh. Because we don't really know that right now, but maybe we could. And given the verbal facility of large language models, humor, a lot of humor is about words, right? These machines know an immense amount about words. Can they also teach us about comedy to the point where someone could be funnier? And is that turning an artist into a better artist? But that's a different kind of work. And going back and forth with an AI, you have to experiment, you have to try different things, you think differently. And so I would encourage everyone here to think about art as not just the forms of art we do today, but what doesn't exist. How do I get there? And how do I use an AI to get there? That's where I find the most fun interacting with AI.
But wait a second. I think there's a difference, there lies a difference, I would say, between what is human and what is AI, right? Like artificial intelligence versus human intelligence. A newborn baby understands humor before we even teach it humor. It starts to laugh about things that are not maybe funny to us, it's funny to a baby, right? We don't know why we think it's funny. We don't know why somebody tripping, it should not be funny. It's funny to all of us, even if we don't want to admit to it.
We have lawyers on here. No tripping.
So I think the question is that how much of the human experience are we able to mathematically, algorithmically, enter into the world of artificial intelligence?
Okay. Great story about a baby, right? So it's going to laugh at something, and it's going to go. We don't really know why. That's where I want to jump in and go, okay, how do we figure out why a baby laughs? Because people have not really explored laughter in babies, and you could experiment to see what makes a baby laugh, and maybe learn more about what it is that goes on in the baby's brain that might teach you more about humor, which might make you a better humorist, whether that's written or doing comedy on stage or whatever. But I think that's precisely where we're going to start to understand things like, I was an inventor for so many years and so many brainstorming sessions, And I did improv at night just to sort of get, in a different sort of headspace. But it turned out the two things were very similar. And one of the things that I saw when I do brainstorming sessions, over and over again, when you hear people laugh in a brainstorming session, I stop the session. Because I've seen that so many times. Inevitably, there is something about the idea that's just presented that tickled our funny bone, whatever that means. And you stop, and almost always, that is a profound thing that you need to stop and unpack, and that's what helps the invention move forward. As we start to understand humor, I think we're going to start to understand more about babies and the evolution of language, and I think that AIs already have sufficient understanding of language and maybe even the visual processing. We're getting very close to answering some of those questions. But that is fundamental. Why does that baby laugh? That strikes me as, that's my art. That's what I want to go after. I want to experiment and find that out. And if I dig and I don't find out, okay, then I'll go on to the next step.
Well, expanding on that sort of like world of art, because we talk about, it's easy for us to think about sculptures and paintings, etc. But there's also all the art, there's literature, there's nonfiction, there's all of that. There's so many different expressions, and that's the idea, right? Is to express. I think every artist, the main difference is that there is, I'm going to argue that an artist has an innate desire to communicate in a way that is not necessarily usual to all of us, whether it's in the form of paintings or photographs, or song and music, or words, right? But then we get to the point where, okay, we learn a lot of all of these things from artificial intelligence, and it becomes really, really good at what we do. But what are we doing it for? Does this serve the collective human experience? Does this serve as a positive for us? After all, if we're inventing something that doesn't serve humanity, what are we inventing it for? Right? So the question, I think it becomes that, where do we go? And how far do we go? One of the first questions, like when we had artificial intelligence, we thought that the very first thing that robots would do would be to take away the work we didn't want to do. And the only thing that we wanted to do is write poems and take photographs and do paintings and play music and all of that stuff. All this stuff that finds expression, from within. But now, more and more, the artistic process is being co-opted. People would argue, by people who just type it in and then let me show this and then all that stuff, right? And then the first beginning of art was like there was a trinity. There was the product, there was the creator, and there is the receiver, right? Or the audience, right? It's always that. So we know that there's a product in AI. We know that there's a receiver in AI. I mean, without human, and this is only without human intervention, is there a creator in AI that makes it verifiably, veritably art as we know it now?
I think I can offer one sort of interesting sort of case study of this, which is so Sotheby's recently sold a work by an AI artist, and the AI artist is actually a robot. It's something that looks like, she looks like a woman. Her eyes have cameras. She's holding a pen or whatever you want to give her, and she can see a subject. She has the sort of computer in her brain, and she can sketch a picture of that subject. And she made a painting of the British mathematician Alan Turing, which is what sold for $1 million at Sotheby's in November. And I think it's a sort of relevant to this question because it's, this robot can see an image like a human can process that image, can recall, if she's painting a picture of flowers, she can recall what other flowers look like and start to sort of fill in the details. And I think, but then there's the other half of the equation, which is me sitting on the other side looking at this painting of flowers. Do I necessarily value it any differently or look at it any differently if I didn't know it was created by this robot? I mean, I probably wouldn't, is the honest truth. I think then the second you tell me, you might think, oh, okay, well, maybe then it's less valuable, or, oh, well, yeah, maybe she is actually missing out this important detail. But yeah, I think that's just a sort of really interesting thing that's come up recently, and is really like taking this AI discussion in art into a whole new field. It's not just a tool, but really the creator.
I can go. Let's go.
Go ahead.
Well, I can talk a little bit about the legal side of that, and disagree with this or not. Anything that's not human is not considered a creator for legal purposes. It could be this machine created that painting. Very cool. She is the creator of that physical object. You might value that more or less. And I personally think it's unique and incredible, and that's a really cool thing to own. Nobody owns the intellectual property rights in that piece. Just like nobody owns the intellectual property rights in raw output from ChatGPT or raw output from Midjourney. If it's just a prompt and an output, or if it's an autonomous machine that is programmed to do something with no human intervention, no copyright. So somebody could own that physical piece, and there's tremendous value to that, because when you buy a painting, unless you specifically buy the IP rights, you do not have the IP rights. That's something that people don't understand necessarily, is when the physical object is different from the copyright rights. So when you buy a painting from, whether it is with Christie's, Sotheby's, anywhere, from a gallery down the street, you own that painting. You can't make prints of it, you can't make t-shirts of it, you can't display it in Times Square. You can put it in your house and enjoy it, and that's about it. Raw AI output, do whatever you want with it. Because the US Copyright Office, part of the Library of Congress, and at least 2 federal courts at this point have said AI is not, the AI algorithm software, program is not an author. It's found that monkeys are not authors. A monkey who took a selfie with a picture, you look this up, pictures, it's like one of my favorite things. This beautiful, grinning, it's so cool. He did not have standing to sue because primates can't own copyrights. Celestial beings, ghosts, angels, whatever people claim that they wrote this book, don't own copyrights. So that's where the state of the law is. Whether you agree with that from a kind of philosophical or moral standpoint is a different question. And I don't think that's going to change unless somebody changes the Copyright Act. It's pretty clear. The Copyright Act doesn't define what an author is, and the Constitution, the IP clause in the Constitution doesn't define what an author is. But it's been pretty consistently interpreted as human, because the law is meant to benefit humans and copyright is meant to foster human creativity. And so that gets into the question of, is AI fostering human creativity, or is it fostering machine creativity? Is it democratizing creativity, or is it taking opportunities away from people who have that training? And so, again, another kind of philosophical and moral question, but from the standpoint of the law, that robot, ChatGPT, is not the owner, and neither is the prompter. The person who, you could do a real detailed prompt, whole paragraph, a poem, put it in, come up with a really cool image. You can copyright that prompt as a text work, as a poem, as a short work of fiction or whatever. Still don't own the output. So it's really dicey, and things might change, the views change and the law changes, but it's notoriously slow to catch up with technology. So expect it to take a long time if it does change.
But the copyright's only to 1929, so anything before 1929 is fair game.
Right. Yep.
I was going to say that art is really, if you boil down the original question, right, what is art? Art is something that makes you feel. And so this AI piece, I don't know, for me it'd be like 100 years from now, it's like, wow, this was the first machine-made piece of art. It may or may not be good, but that's pretty cool, right? And just like everyone's kid can make Jackson Pollock, but if you think about Jackson Pollock probably drunk somewhere in his East Hampton apartment, rolling around in this paint, creating this, like, all the pain that was in there, right? That's part of the emotion that it evokes. I mean, for me, everybody here know this artist, Felix Gonzalez Torres. He was a Cuban artist, American, he was here in the 80s. The piece that really, when I see it, I'm like, whoa. It's a very simple piece. I think it's untitled, like most of his work. But it's 100, so he grew up in the 80s, or he was an artist in the 80s here in New York City. And during that time, there was AIDS crisis. And so he had a lover that was about 175 pounds and was dying of AIDS. And so the piece that he created in honor of his lover was 175 pounds of little candies that you get from the store, right? Those little Brock's candies that are like individually wrapped. And so as a viewer, you can come, you can take a piece of candy, do whatever you want with it, throw it out, eat it, you know, whatever. And why it's so emotional is the fact that this was the representation of the body being slowly eaten away by age, right? At some point, there's no candy. And, right, and if you think about it, anybody could do that. But, so you think about the whole story behind it, how it makes you feel, because that's what art is. And so if AI could do that, you know, then, hey, people feel more, they stop, you know, doing.
But I think the comparison between the comparison between those two examples, the similarity between those two examples is that the creation of the art by a robot is a moment in human history. It's not a moment in robot history. It's a moment in human history. And the art with the aids, it's a moment in history which we would want to remember, right? But if you replicate the moment in robot history 1 trillion times, it's no longer just like if you made 1 billion cups, it's no longer art. If you made that one really great cup, it could be art, right? So I think what we're capturing with art is that little speck in time when we exist. Like for instance, we're in the Lincoln House, right? We call it Lincoln House. It's not Lincoln House. It's James Rush's house, right? But it's Lincoln House because we're capturing a moment in history where it was very relevant to have this house in that particular period in time. Take that out of the context, right? Take out all of those things out of the context. I mean, I talked about this before. There is no Zuckerberg house. There is no Bezos house. There is no Musk house. Because those people are not attached to the property that they own, and therefore it doesn't register as a moment in human history as an important one. Because they will get rid of that house tomorrow if it were no longer convenient, right? But these people, the Vanderbilts, the Rockefellers, they lived in these houses and through their generations, and they valued it, and therefore we value it as human beings because it's part of our New York history.
What I was just going to quickly say was that you're right. The AI cannot, at this point, cannot create something that's relevant to human history. But at some point, when I'm hanging out with my robot pal, that might be relevant in robot history, right? And they're like, remember that time that my ancestor sold that thing at Sotheby's, and just like we don't understand animal history or anything else, right? We only know what we know as humans, but maybe AI goes on a path, they become Austrian robots and start making cool stuff. I don't know.
So this stage, I just wanted to kind of like open up. I know we're running a little bit late, but James, did you want to say something? Otherwise, I was going to open it up to the audience if they have any questions. I'm going to be like
I can speak up.
water bucket.
I can speak up. My question is for James, because James mentioned about why do babies smile, and my thought as you were speaking about it was maybe they got it from the DNA of the parents instead of trying to find out from AI. I think that maybe the baby smiles because when a human sees a certain emotion or something like that, they may react by smiling, and maybe the baby got that from the DNA of the parent. So have you thought about that?
Yeah, I mean, that is one explanation. It says it is something in the DNA, but the DNA has to be expressed somehow, but there might be a genetic component to humor. And that some babies might not laugh, but others that have this gene or that gene, they might not laugh, or they laugh more, or they laugh differently, right? That's all of this when I talk about learning from AIs, learning from tools, experimenting, and that would be get a lot of babies, show them a lot of different stuff, and find out if there are patterns. And where do you see patterns? And when you find a pattern, then explore more deeply. But DNA for sure, your environment for sure, your parents. Yeah.
I just want to add to that. But maybe the babies who don't smile, maybe their parents never smiled. Maybe the parents didn't have that type of DNA for them to smile.
Or a cultural thing, right? Some cultures don't, some cultures laugh at funerals more than they do another culture.
Exactly.
It's different. Right, but what makes up those differences? And is it how much is cultural, how much is DNA, how much is something else? Hey, somewhere in the mix there, dig in, have fun, gather some data, find some patterns, make some hypotheses. But I agree with you, it could be a lot of things.
Well, and also DNA could very well be a much more sophisticated form of programming. And at the end of all of this really wonderful thing, when we finally achieve the pinnacle of technology and artificial intelligence, would it be funny if they came up with the most perfect product? It's just a human being, and just go back to just being a baby, that's like the most. So, yes.
I have a question. We talked about AI not owning its own intellectual property, but do you think that AI will become so brilliant that it'll start writing its own laws and governing itself?
AI is already writing laws and German laws, and that's already going. You'll see a lot more of that. AI generating law for sure. But yeah, I don't know.
Scott?
That would be terrifying. Maybe they can write better laws than humans. And some of them are. I was literally staring at my screen today, trying to decipher a portion of the Copyright Act to answer a question from a client. I was like, I just have to come back to this. I came back to it later and finally kind of understood what I was reading. But I think one of the benefits of having this tool, because I agree it is a tool, is to help clarify things and help with writing and help with editing and ideation. And technologically, I don't know whether it will ever come to a point where it's like, AGI and sentient and can come up with its own, societal structure or whatever. I don't know if I want to be alive for that if it does happen, but it doesn't do that now, but I think it can be used to help us make things clearer and make people understand the law better. One has to be really careful though, because it did not hallucinate in your bio. None of the stuff about me anyway was hallucinated, but it does tend to hallucinate. And just as a kind of not so funny anecdote, lawyers get in trouble for using ChatGPT because it makes up case law. And so yes, it is writing its own law. It comes up with cases that don't exist, and then lawyers who don't check their briefs put it in the brief, and the judge is like, counsel, I couldn't find this case. Can you send me a copy of it? And they're like, oops, and they get sanctioned or disbarred or whatever. And so there's a lot of pitfalls, and so hopefully it will get better. But not.
I think we see that in practice in C-SPAN. Questions? Anybody else? Yeah, Donna.
Hi. So I'm Donna Jurgensen, and I work at the Science House with James. And I was just thinking about what we talk about as far as art and who makes art. And I was thinking about what James and his team has created, this platform called Kids Creation. And in Kids Creation, a child can create their characters and their settings. And so when we were going through the program while it was in beta, it was kind of interesting to me because the kid who said, I want a setting that's prehistoric. I want a dog. I want a princess. I want a villain, right? And at some point, the dog had fangs. And I was saying to James and his tech team, like, why does this dog have fangs? Right? Not realizing that it's a teaching tool. Like AI created a teaching tool for kids because in that time, dogs looked wolf-like. They were wolf-like. And then when I looked at the images and I'm like, are we replacing artists? But we're not. We're encouraging children to think about art in a different way. Like as it was appearing and they were creating this image, right? Just by pressing, like making choices. And so I kind of changed my thought process to think like, wow. And this was all created with AI, right? So James and his team is using the technology in a way to like teach children or create images. And they're not from a human, but it is based on the information that the system has. So I felt like this is kind of the future. And then our children will be introduced to art. And maybe that's going to ignite their interest in creating their own art. And we're going to create artists.
Well, you know,
And that's
yeah.
why, that's.
I think music, you know, we saw that already, music, we've seen it in music, right? Our idea of music composition before and being a songwriter was that, you know, you play the piano or guitar, whatever it is, and you put lyrics and you know, wrote the chords and that was music. And then comes DJing and mixing music, and now there's no new form of music that we say is legitimate, where children could mix their own music and it's now considered their creation. It's a new creation, right? It's no longer just like the, you know, well, I created out of nowhere. It's like a mix of different things. And children these days, they don't know any differently. That you know, it wasn't like that. You know, we have 3, 4-year-olds that have mixers at home, and they're beginning to sort of like play with that, and that's sort of like the beginning of the transition. David, get a question.
I work a lot in digital media, and you know, we're still not at like the Jetsons era, you know, and I think things are primarily 2D, but not 3D. You know, Milan had a show called The New Craft, the Triennale in 2016, where everything, even 3D printed things, still have like a post-processor. You know, there's an artist, Barry Exwell, who does a lot of things where he's using a robotic carver, but depending on the material or the subject, still takes thousands of hours in hands to get there. So I guess the question is there a timeline for the hands and the materials to catch up with the kind of instructions of AI?
Yeah, I think in sculpture in particular, right, since each new stuff that's being done, I think that, yeah, there's an initial pass from the AI and then humans have to take over to finish. I think it's going to start, the AI will start finishing certain parts of it. You know, there's a chunk of finishing work to do. They'll do some of it and then the next piece and the next piece and the next piece and the next piece, and eventually they're doing it all. And that's sort of the way that's the pattern that we've seen over and over and over again. Because when you created images a while back and you had, you know, humans had like 6 fingers or they had 4 arms or whatever, you could sort of take that picture and then hack it to get it to look more human-like. But now you can just create an image in one prompt, so boom, it's 5 fingers, it's perfect, it's photorealistic. The same thing will happen because it's just the same pattern. It's happening over and over and over and over again, and it always goes the same direction. So far.
And also, what's the difference between, you know, having a you know, manual chisel and chiseling your way through stone or woodwork or whatever it is, and having the power tools now to be able to do it much quickly, much more efficiently and better? You're still the one that's sort of like doing, you know, whatever it is that you had in your mind, but you have the tools to kind of like make it a lot easier for you. Any other questions from the audience? Yes, please.
I'm just curious, what would be your take on NFTs? And just for those that don't know.
NFTs.
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't think I would answer that. That's a hard one. I'm biased because I do collect and I create on art on chain, and I'm not retiring on it anytime soon. It's just kind of a fun period about it for me. I do think there is there is an art market. It's not as good as it used to be. It's not as robust as it used to be. I hope it gets there someday. And we were talking a little earlier about how the younger generations, and my kids included, like digital assets are something they really like. You know, they're playing Roblox and they want to get the skin, they want to get the little pet or whatever. Like that's valuable to them. And I didn't understand that before I started in the digital art space. And to me, it is, you have a digital frame, and I have this beautiful frame that can loop through, you know, my collection, and like I have art on my wall that's kind of like an unlimited gallery. People don't see the value in it yet, I don't think. There's certainly not a majority, and you can probably speak to, both of you can probably speak to this. I hope they will, but I think that the blockchain part of it needs to be like drastically simplified. It is so cumbersome and confusing, and it pisses me off to no end. After 2 years in this space, I still can't figure it out. Like how to swap currencies and stuff. Nobody wants to do this. You tell them get a wallet on the blockchain, they're like, never mind. So if it's simplified, I think it has a future. But I'd be definitely curious about you guys.
So the market for NFTs, I'm sure a lot of people are aware, spiked during COVID, and that's when we had that work by people, which made $69 million. And it came crashing down pretty hard over the last year, and I think now the market is essentially the same as it was prior to COVID. So, someone who's sort of responsible for giving people wise art investment decisions, I wouldn't advise it. But as you said, I think younger generations will be more comfortable with it. I also think there's an important distinction between NFTs and digital art, because they aren't necessarily one and the same. You can have a digital artwork that's not an NFT. And something interesting that's happened is that actually artworks that have AI generated components and sort of digital art, the market for that has actually been sort of steadily progressing, even as the market for NFTs is like really crashed. So I think that's a sort of really interesting nuance to pay attention to when we talk about these things, because I think they're very different.
Roger, and then
It was just a great thing. I think your comment about blockchain, we wish it was simplified. I think it was intentionally chosen because it wasn't simple. And that
I've heard that perspective too. Yeah.
Roger.
And I'm just talking now, put my tech hat on, and I hate quoting this guy, but one guy that wrote this book, 0 to 1, basically said, if what you're creating isn't 10 times better than what's previously out there, probably gonna fail, right? So is an NFT better than a painting on the wall? I don't know, I'm sick of staring at my screen, so probably not, right? And I think once there's possibly some utility to it, I know that they were creating utility, they were, I think something that's interesting is people now collect tickets. And, they have all these cool tickets, Thrilla and Manila that me and Jake saw, or, Michael Jordan's first game or whatever, right? These were all
There's no way
physical things.
Thrilla is something you saw, because that was like a big goal.
No, the actual ticket stub, right? So you're selling ticket stubs because there's, again, going back to the feeling of, oh my God, this was like the fight that changed, sports history. And so now that tickets are now digital, it's a great use case for NFTs, because now you actually have this NFT ticket on your phone saying, I was at Otani's 50-50, or I was at this concert, or I was at this life-changing event, and that's much better than these stupid little stubs that get bent, that get broken, you probably toss them, right?
Or the David Bowie Metro cards, which are totally useless, which we lined up for, and I literally tried to get from my friends like a whole collection of them for absolutely no reason, when we could have just done it all digitally and it would have been better, right?
But I have those Bowie cards if anybody wants them.
So do I. Well, on that note, thank you very much to our panelists. I know we're going to go over, but we do need to eat and drink, and so let's reserve some for that. So we invite you to go up to the top floor and also the roof, have some drinks, relax, talk to each other, and maybe continue the conversation there. Again, thank you, EJ Harrison. Thank you to my guys at Global Wealth, Kenneth Moore, Colin Begley, Perry Law, and also my co-listing agent, Andy Kim. There you go. Who we all, put all of our efforts together to have this great night of conversation. We hope to see you soon in the next event, in the next discussion about life, not just art, but life, wealth, right? And where we go from here. Thank you. Have a great evening.